Stay out of my business, Dad. You're just an old mechanic. I'm the one who built this empire, my son said coldly, his words cutting deeper than any blade. I stood there, stunned. The garage I had built with my bare hands, suddenly feeling like a stranger's place. All those years of sweat, honesty, and sacrifice reduced to nothing in a single sentence. They laughed, thinking I was powerless, a relic of the past, too weak to fight back. I let them believe it. I let them enjoy their moment. But they never expected that I had already made a decision, one that would change everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The air in my garage was wrong. It used to smell of WD-40 worn leather and the faint, sweet scent of metal polish. Tonight it smelled of champagne and some cloying perfume Vanessa favored. The low hum of the fluorescent work lights was gone, replaced by the clinking of glasses and the murmur of soft jazz from hidden speakers. My tools, once arranged with a surgeon's precision, were hidden behind white velvet ropes, as if they were embarrassing relics of a forgotten age. Julian called it a portfolio showcase. I called it a desecration. I stood in a shadowed corner, a ghost at my own feast. I watched my son Julian glide between men in tailored suits, his smile as bright and artificial as the spotlights glinting off the hood of a 2067 Mustang I'd bled over for a year. He wasn't talking about horsepower or the thrill of the open road. He was talking about yields, market trends, and capital appreciation. He wasn't selling a car. He was selling a stock certificate with 4 wheels. Vanessa, his wife, was in her element. She drifted through the crowd, her phone held up like a scepter, capturing content for her lifestyle blog. She would occasionally stop to adjust a flower arrangement or reposition a leather sofa they'd brought in, ensuring the Vance Automotive Investments logo was perfectly framed in every shot. My name, my legacy, had been reduced to a backdrop for their social media ambitions. I felt a quiet rage simmering beneath my calm exterior. They had taken my sanctuary, a place of honest work and tangible creation, and draped it in the cheap fabric of their superficial world. These were not car lovers. They were vultures picking over the bones of something they could never truly understand. They loved the image of the work, but they despised the work itself. My attention was drawn to a heavy-set man in a suit, a potential whale Julian had been courting for weeks. He was circling the Mustang, his eyes narrowed with a professional skepticism that I recognized and respected. He wasn't just looking, he was seeing. He ran a hand along the passenger side door, his expression thoughtful. I knew what he was feeling. I had felt it myself. The clear coat was too thin a shortcut Julian had insisted on to meet the deadline for this showcase. It was a flaw only a true craftsman or a very discerning buyer would notice. The man looked up, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for an honest answer. His gaze passed right over Julian and landed on me. The investor, a man I now recognized as Marcus Harrison, a notoriously shrewd collector, ignored Julian completely. His eyes were locked on me. He took a step away from the car and began to walk toward my corner, effectively pulling the center of gravity in the room with him. The soft jazz music seemed to fade. Conversations nearby faltered as people sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Julian, seeing his prize client moving away from the prize car, scrambled to intercept. "Marcus, if you have any concerns, I can assure you." Harrison raised a hand, silencing my son without a glance. He stopped a few feet from me, his expression unreadable. "You're Elias Vance," he said. It wasn't a question. "I've followed your work for 30 years. I own 2 of your restorations, a 2063 Corvette and a 2070 Chevelle. They're flawless." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steady. "I remember those cars well. Which is why this one puzzles me," he said, gesturing back at the Mustang. "The clear coat on the door. It's not your standard. It feels rushed. Am I wrong? This was it. The moment of truth." I could see Julian out of the corner of my eye, his face pale, his eyes pleading with me, warning me. I could have lied. I could have mumbled something about a new technique, an experimental process. I could have protected the sale, protected my son. But in that moment, looking at a man who truly understood the work, a lie felt like a betrayal of everything I had ever stood for. "You are not wrong, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice clear and caring in the quiet room. It was a shortcut, a compromise on materials to meet a deadline. It's not a finish I would have put my name on. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as shattered glass. Harrison's face showed a flicker of disappointment, but it was quickly replaced by a look of respect. He nodded once, a gesture of finality. "Thank you for your honesty, Elias," he said. He then turned to Julian, his voice dropping to a cold, business-like tone. "The deal is off, Julian. Integrity is the one thing you can't restore once it's lost. With that, he turned and walked toward the exit, leaving a crater of silence in his wake. The showcase was over. I saw it in the faces of the other guests, who were now whispering amongst themselves, their eyes darting between me and my son. Julian stood frozen for a moment, his face a mask of disbelief. Then his eyes found mine, and the disbelief curdled into a white-hot rage. He waited until the last of the guests had awkwardly shuffled out, leaving just the three of us in the cavernous, silent garage. "What did you just do?" he finally hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "I told the truth," I said simply. "Something you should have done." "The truth," Vanessa stepped forward, her voice shrill. "The truth just cost us a $500,000 commitment. Do you have any idea the work I put into this?" The people I invited. Julian took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You couldn't just keep your mouth shut for 5 minutes. You had to humiliate me. In front of everyone, the accusation, so twisted and unfair, finally broke through my calm. You humiliated yourself, Julian. I shot back, my own voice rising. You put a flawed product on display and tried to pass it off as perfect. You humiliated my name. Your name, Julian laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Your name is on the sign because it opens doors, because it has value. A value we are trying to build into a real business, not some dusty hobby shop for old men. A hobby shop. I felt the blood drain from my face. This hobby shop put a roof over your head. It paid for your fancy business degree, the one that apparently taught you how to sell a product, but not how to build one. "Oh, here we go," Vanessa sneered, crossing her arms. "The lecture from Saint Elias, the patron saint of sawdust and grease. We get it. You worked hard. But the world has changed. People don't care about your stories. They care about results, about brands. And what is a brand without integrity?" I demanded, my voice rising to a roar. "It's a lie, a hollow shell, and I will not stand by and watch you turn 50 years of my life into a lie." "Then don't stand by," Julian said, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, venomous whisper that was more chilling than his shouting. "Get out." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "What did you say?" he said. "Get out," Vanessa repeated, stepping forward, her face a mask of cold disdain. "We can't have you here. You're a liability. You're unpredictable. You live in the past, and you're dragging us down with you." "This is my garage," I said, my voice barely a whisper, the fight suddenly draining out of me, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. "I built this place, and you sold it to the company." Julian countered, his eyes like chips of ice. "You are an employee, Dad, an advisor, and your advice is no longer needed. Your methods are obsolete." He walked to the main roll-up door, the one I had installed with my own hands, and hit the large red button on the wall. The heavy electric motor groaned to life, and the massive steel door began its slow, grinding descent. The gap of night sky narrowed the sounds of the distant highway, fading. "Julian, don't," I pleaded, taking a step forward. He didn't look at me. He just stood there, his back rigid as the door continued to close. "This is our business now," he said, his voice flat final. "We don't need you." Vanessa walked to the smaller side door, the one I used every day, and held it open for me, her expression one of utter finality. It wasn't an invitation. It was an eviction. I stood there for a second, paralyzed, caught between the sun who wouldn't look at me, and the closing steel wall that was sealing my life away. The last thing I saw before I turned to leave was the cold, indifferent sheen of the Mustang under the spotlights. I walked through the side door Vanessa was holding. She didn't say a word, just pulled it shut behind me. The click of the lock echoed in the sudden, profound silence. I was outside in the cold, standing on the gravel of the driveway, a trespasser at my own legacy. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a sound of finality, a sound that severed a chord deep inside my soul. For a long moment I didn't move, my feet rooted to the cold gravel. The cold of the late autumn evening seeped through my jacket, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the weather. My reflection stared back from the darkened windows of the garage, a ghostly figure superimposed over the gleaming shapes of the cars inside. My cars, my work, my prison. Turning away felt like tearing something from my own chest. Each step on the short walk to my small house 100 yards away felt like a mile. The path was dark, lit only by the cold, indifferent stars. Obsolete. The word Julian had thrown at me echoed with every crunch of my shoes on the gravel. Inside my house, the silence was a physical weight. The smell of old books and sawdust, a scent I'd always cherished, felt mocking now. I sank into my worn leather armchair, the springs groaning in protest. My eyes scanned the room, landing on the framed architectural plans for the main garage hanging on the wall. My plans, my design, my dream. A wave of memory so sharp and vivid it felt like it was happening right now washed over me. I was 20 years younger, sitting at this very dining table, which was then covered not in memories but in financial statements. My wife Martha had been gone for a year, and the grief was still a raw, open wound. Julian, fresh out of business school, with a head full of ambitious ideas and a mountain of student debt, was explaining his vision. He wanted to expand the garage not just as a workshop but as a high-end brokerage, a place to buy and sell classic cars, not just restore them. It was a good idea, a smart idea, but it required capital we didn't have. "It's the future, Dad," he had said, his eyes shining with an almost manic energy. "We could build an empire." I remember looking at my retirement account statements. The numbers represented 40 years of hard work, of skipped vacations, and patched-up boots. It was my safety net, the cushion Martha and I had carefully built for my old age. Julian saw the hesitation in my eyes. "It's an investment, Dad," he'd insisted. "In me, in our family's future." I had looked at my son, saw the ghost of his mother in his hopeful eyes, and I had folded. I liquidated nearly all of it. I handed him my future, my security, my life savings on the promise of his dream. I had bet everything on him, and he had taken that bet and built his empire. He'd built the gleaming extension, hired the staff, and courted the investors. He had also, piece by piece, pushed me out of it, and tonight he had finally cashed in the last of my investment, throwing me out with the trash. The word obsolete came back to me, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just my methods he was calling obsolete. It was my sacrifice, my love, my entire life. He had deemed it all worthless, a relic of a bygone era. The pain was so profound it was physical, a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. I had given him my past and my future, and in return he had left me with nothing. The heavy stone of grief in my stomach seemed to pull me deeper into the worn leather of the armchair. My gaze drifted from the garage plans on the wall to the mantelpiece cluttered with the artifacts of a life I no longer recognized. My eyes settled on a framed photograph tucked behind a dusty car show trophy. It was me and Julian taken 35 years ago. He was 10, all goofy grin and missing front teeth, holding a socket wrench almost as big as his arm. I was kneeling beside him, my arm around his small shoulders, my face smudged with grease but beaming with pride. We were standing in front of my very first full restoration, a 2069 Camaro. I remembered that day so clearly. After his mother passed, it was just the two of us, and the garage became our whole world. It was where I taught him not just about engines but about life. "Okay, listen," I'd tell him, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "An engine is like a heart. It needs to breathe, it needs fuel, and everything has to work together. You can't force it, you have to understand it." He would watch, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and intense concentration, as I showed him how to gap a spark plug or torque a head bolt. His small hands would try to mimic mine, clumsy at first, but determined. I never got impatient. I saw the spark in him, the same fire that burned in me. He had the touch. On that day in the photograph, we had just finished the Camaro. The sun was hot, the air smelled of gasoline and fresh paint, and his small voice was filled with a reverence that made my own heart swell. "One day I'm going to be just like you, Dad," he'd said, his eyes wide as he looked at the gleaming machine. I'd ruffled his hair. "You'll be even better, son. You'll build an empire." The memory was so clear, so painful, it felt like a physical wound reopening. What had happened to that boy? Where did his awe for the work get replaced by a cold calculation of its market value? I had given him my knowledge, my passion, my soul, hoping he would carry the legacy. And he had, but he'd stripped it of its heart, polished away its meaning, and turned it into a cold, hard number on a balance sheet. I had tried to build a son, but it seemed I had only built a competitor. He had taken my dream of an empire and twisted it, making it a kingdom where I was no longer welcome. The boy in the picture, the one who wanted to be just like his dad, was gone. He had been replaced by a stranger who looked at me with contempt, who called my life's work obsolete. The silence of the house pressed in, and for the first time I felt the true crushing weight of my loneliness. I hadn't just lost a business. I had lost my son, my past, and the future I had worked my entire life to build for him. The inheritance I had meant to leave him wasn't one of wealth but of purpose, and he had just thrown it back in my face. I woke to the thin gray light of dawn, still slumped in the armchair. My neck was stiff, and a bitter, stale taste coated my tongue. The house was unnaturally still, the silence a physical weight pressing in on me. I made coffee out of habit, the motions automatic, but the rich aroma brought no comfort. I just stared into the black liquid, watching the steam curl and vanish like a ghost. Obsolete. The word was a splinter in my mind, and every tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall drove it deeper. Then a shrill ringing cut through the quiet. The telephone. My first instinct was a jolt of fear. Julian, calling to twist the knife to lay down new rules. I stared at it, letting it ring once, twice, my hand trembling slightly. On the third ring, I saw the caller ID. Not Julian. It was Alex, my grandson. With a deep breath that felt like it was tearing through scar tissue, I snatched the receiver. "Hello," my voice was a dry rasp. "Grandpa, it's me, Alex." His voice was hesitant, low, as if he was hiding. Are you okay? I heard Mom and Dad last night." They were, loud. The simple concern in his voice was a crack of light in my dark room. "I'm all right, kid. Just a long night." "It wasn't right," he said, a sudden firmness in his tone. "What they did, he shouldn't have talked to you like that." He paused. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. It's not your apology to make, Alex," I said, my voice softening. "But thank you. I wanted to tell you something," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but they were yelling. Dad's in some kind of trouble. Some big investment went bad. I heard him say that everything, and he meant everything, is riding on the sale of the Shelby at the auction." The words hit me with a strange clarity. The splinter in my mind was suddenly joined by a new piece of information. It wasn't just pride on the line for Julian. It was survival. "He said they're counting on a record sale," Alex whispered. He sounded scared, Grandpa. I've never heard him sound like that before. He kept talking, telling me about a new engine schematic he was studying, but my mind was elsewhere. I was replaying his words. Everything is riding on the sale of the Shelby, the car I had spent 5 years of my life on, the car he had used as a prop to throw me out of my own life. It wasn't just a symbol of his new hollow brand anymore. It was his lifeline, the one thing he believed would save him, and I was the one who had breathed life into it. I was the one who knew its every secret, its every strength, its every weakness. "Grandpa, are you still there?" Alex's voice pulled me back. "I'm here, son," I said, and for the first time since that garage door had slammed shut, my voice wasn't weak. It was low, steady, and humming with a new cold energy. "Thank you for calling. You've helped more than you know." I hung up the phone. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my core, but it was no longer the all-consuming void it had been. It now had a focus, a purpose. This was no longer just about a personal insult, about a father's wounded pride. It was about the fundamental value of the work itself. Julian had leveraged my life's work for his gamble, all while calling it obsolete. It was time for a lesson. It was time for an accounting. It wasn't just about honor anymore. It was about justice. And Julian was about to get a very expensive education on the true meaning of value. For 2 days, the idea of justice simmered. It was no longer a hot, bubbling anger, but a low, steady heat. I knew this couldn't be a battle fought with emotion. That was Julian's arena, all flash and noise. My fight had to be different. It had to be precise, strategic, and built on a foundation of undeniable truth. It had to be engineered. And for that, I needed an architect. There was only one name in my mind, Henry Blackwood. We'd known each other for 50 years since we were both young men with more ambition than sense. I'd helped him restore his first car, a beat-up Triumph TR3, and he'd helped me navigate the paperwork to open my first garage. Now he was a semi-retired lawyer with a mind as sharp as a laser cutter. His office was downtown in an old brick building with a real brass plaque next to the door. It smelled the way a lawyer's office should, of old leather paper and strong coffee. Henry greeted me not with a handshake, but with a firm clap on the shoulder. He was a small, wiry man with eyes that missed nothing. "Elias," he said, ushering me into his office, which was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. "You look like you've been through a war. Sit. Tell me everything." He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, and sat behind his massive mahogany desk. I took the worn leather chair opposite him, the one I'd sat in a dozen times over the years when faced with less earth-shattering problems. "It's Julian," I said simply. Henry's easy smile faded. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Go on." I told him everything. The showcase, the investor, the shortcut on the clear coat, the argument, the final brutal words, the cold final clang of the garage door. I laid it all out piece by painful piece, my voice flat and even. I wasn't there for sympathy. I was there for ammunition. Henry listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving mine, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock. "So," Henry said, finally, his voice a low, thoughtful hum, "he threw you out of the business you built. using the very name you established, and is now planning to save himself by selling the crown jewel of your life's work. And he did it in the most humiliating way possible. That about sums it up, I said, the coffee warming my cold hands. Henry leaned back, the old chair creaking in protest. He stared at the ceiling for a long moment, lost in thought. Legally, Elias, it's a tough spot, he said, finally looking at me, his expression grim. He is the operating manager of the LLC. Vanessa is a co-owner. You sold your controlling interest to the company years ago. On paper, they have the right to control the premises, to make business decisions, even to fire an advisor. The words were a bucket of cold water, but I didn't flinch. I had expected this. So what are you telling me, Henry? I asked. That there's nothing I can do, he shook his head slowly. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you we can't fight him on his battlefield. We can't sue him for being a bad son or an arrogant fool. The law doesn't care about that. He leaned forward again, his eyes sharp. The question is, what do you want? Do you want money? Do you want the garage back? Or do you want something else? I looked past Henry out the tall window at the bustling street below, but I didn't see the city. I saw my grandson's face earnest and full of respect. I saw a 10-year-old boy with grease on his cheek, beaming with pride. I don't want his money, Henry, I said, my voice low and steady. And I don't want the garage back. It's tainted. What I want is an education. I want him to understand what's priceless. Henry's sharp eyes narrowed. An education. Elias, the courts don't offer degrees in humility. I'm not talking about the courts, I said, leaning forward. I told you we can't fight him on his battlefield, so we have to pull him onto mine. I paused, letting the words settle. We have to show him that the steel is worthless without the story. The story, Henry repeated, a flicker of intrigue in his eyes. You said that before. It's a fine sentiment, but it's not a legal argument. It's not a sentiment. It's a tangible asset, I countered. And it's the one asset I never signed away. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book no bigger than my hand. I slid it across the massive, polished desk. It looked small and insignificant in the center of all that mahogany. Henry picked it up, his brow furrowed in confusion. He opened it. What is this? A diary. It's a certificate of provenance and restoration history, I explained. For the last 30 years, every single vehicle that has left my workshop under my name comes with one of those. Inside is everything. The car's original factory specs, its ownership history, and then the restoration. Every panel replaced, every bolt torqued. Photographs of the process, from rusted frame to final paint. At the end, on the very last page, is my personal guarantee of its authenticity. I looked him straight in the eye, and my signature. Henry was no longer listening to me. His sharp eyes were scanning the pages, his legal mind connecting dots I couldn't see. He flipped through the detailed entries, the part numbers, the photographic evidence. He understood. So without this book, he asked slowly, his voice hushed with dawning realization. Without the book, I confirmed, it's just a shiny old car. Its history is unverified. Its value is speculative. With the book, its provenance is undeniable. Its value can be 50, sometimes 70% higher. It becomes a piece of history. A slow smile, the one I'd seen him use right before dismantling a witness in court, spread across Henry's face. He let out a low whistle and leaned back, holding the small book as if it were a precious gem. You magnificent old bastard, he breathed, shaking his head in admiration. It's a chain of title. Not for the car, but for its soul. Does Julian have the books for the cars in the garage? He has them, I said. He thinks of them as a good marketing tool, a prop. And he can't get new ones. There's only one man who can issue them, and he's sitting in your office. Henry stood up and began to pace his mind, now moving at full speed. And I assume every certificate has a unique serial number that you keep in a private ledger. Of course, I said. He stopped and pointed a finger at me, his eyes alight with strategic fire. Elias, this isn't just a lesson. This is a weapon. A beautiful, elegant, and perfectly legal weapon. A weapon, Henry repeated, his eyes gleaming. And the beauty of it is, it's a weapon he gave you. He built his entire brand on your name, and now we're going to use that name to dismantle. He stopped pacing and leaned over the desk, his voice dropping. So what's the plan? We can file an injunction tomorrow. Stop him from selling anything until the provenance of every car is legally verified by you. I shook my head slowly. Number. That's a direct attack. It's loud, it's messy. He'll lawyer up, drag it out in court for years. It becomes a legal squabble, and the truth gets lost in the noise. He'll paint me as a bitter old man trying to ruin him. So what do you suggest? Henry asked, intrigued. Psychological warfare. Precisely, I said. We don't want him to fight me. We want him to fight himself. Julian is arrogant, Henry. His pride is his greatest weakness. If we attack him directly, he'll rally. But if we create doubt, if we make his own clients question him, he'll start making mistakes. He'll become his own worst enemy. Henry sat back down, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. I like it. So how do we begin this campaign of doubt? We don't go for the king, I said, tapping the corner of the desk for emphasis. Not yet. Attacking the Shelby now is premature. He'd focus all his energy on defending it. Anidan. Number, we go for a pawn. Something he's already sold, something he thinks is a closed chapter. Make him fight a battle on a front he's not expecting, Henry mused. Brilliant. Do you have a specific car in mind? A few months ago, he sold a 2065 Corvette Stingray to a collector in California, I said. I remember the restoration. Julian pushed for a non-original paint color because it was trending. The certificate reflects that, of course, but Julian sold it as a period-correct artistic choice. A small lie, but a lie nonetheless, Henry nodded. Exactly. It's a crack in the facade, I said. We don't need to prove he's a fraud. We just need to plant a seed of doubt. We need to start a whisper. And how do we do that? You know that blogger, Classic Steel and Soul, I asked. The one who prides himself on investigative journalism. He's respected. He's a purist. He hates people like Julian. Henry's smile widened. He understood immediately. We leak him an anonymous tip. A question. Is the Vance collection cutting corners? Here's something to look into. We give him the VIN number of the Stingray and a few technical questions to ask. He'll do the rest, I finished. He'll call the owner, he'll dig, he'll write an article. It won't be a direct accusation, but it will be full of questions. And in our world, Henry, a question from the right person can be more damaging than an answer. Phase 1, Operation Whisper, Henry declared, already grabbing a legal pad and a pen. Sow doubt and paranoia. Force him onto the defensive. I love it. He scribbled furiously for a moment, then looked up, his eyes sharp. And phase 2, I said, my voice turning cold, as ice is when he's bleeding, paranoid, and desperate. When all his hopes are pinned on one last massive sale. The Shelby, Henry breathed. At the Barrett-Jackson auction, I confirmed. That's when we stop whispering. And we make the entire world hear us shout. We didn't meet at Henry's office again. Instead, he chose a small, dimly lit coffee shop on the other side of town, the kind of place with worn-out booths and a lingering smell of burnt coffee that kept most people away. It was perfect. Anonymous. Henry arrived with a battered laptop under his arm. He didn't order anything, just slid into the booth opposite me and opened the machine. All right, he said, his voice low. I've set up a temporary encrypted email account. It'll bounce through 3 different servers and vanish 24 hours after we send the message. Tell me exactly what I need to write. This part felt strange foreign. I was a man who worked with his hands with tangible things like steel and leather. This world of whispers and digital shadows was not mine. But it was the battlefield Julian had chosen, so I had to learn the language. The blogger's name is David Morrison, I began. His site is Classic Steel and Soul. He prides himself on being a purist. He hates shortcuts. I've read his work, Henry said, his fingers poised over the keyboard. He's a bulldog. Good. What's the target? The 2065 Corvette Stingray. Sold in August to a Mr. Alistair Finch in Napa Valley. VIN number ends in 4277. I had spent the last 2 nights going through my old logbooks, my mind sharp and clear. Julian's team sold it as having a period-correct artistic choice of rally red paint. And the truth, Henry asked, typing rapidly. The truth is, rally red wasn't offered on the 2065 model. It's a 2066 color. Finch is a wine guy, not a car guy. He wouldn't know the difference. But Morrison will. Excellent, Henry muttered. What else? The carburetor, I said. It's a replacement. A good one, but not the original Holly. The certificate notes it, but it's buried in the technical specs. Julian's sales brochure just said, fully restored original engine. Henry's fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't just typing. He was composing carefully, crafting each word to sound not like an attack, but like a concerned tip from a fellow enthusiast. He read the draft aloud in a low murmur. Mr. Morrison, I'm a long-time admirer of your work and your dedication to authenticity. A thought occurred to me regarding the Vance collection that you might find interesting. While no one doubts the master's touch, one wonders if the new management is upholding the same rigorous standards. For instance, I believe Alistair Finch's recently acquired 2065 Stingray sports a 2066 color, and one might inquire about the originality of its carburetor. Perhaps a story for you to look into. Keep up the great work, a fellow purist. He looked up at me. What do you think? It's perfect, I said. It was subtle, respectful, and planted just enough poison to get a man like Morrison interested. It questioned the new management, leaving my own name untouched. All right, Henry said, taking a deep breath. Here we go. Operation Whisper is a go. His finger hovered over the send key for a dramatic moment before clicking down. The email was gone, fired like a single silent bullet into the digital world. He closed the laptop. It's done, he said. The stone is in the water. Now we just have to wait for the ripples. We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the hum of the old coffee machine. A strange sense of unreality washed over me. The battle had begun, not with the roar of an engine, but with the quiet click of a key. The waiting was the hardest part. For a week there was nothing. I checked David Morrison's blog every morning, my heart giving a slight lurch each time, only to find articles about Italian design or the history of the muscle car. I started to think our silent bullet had missed its mark, lost in the noise of the internet. Henry advised patience. A man like Morrison is a hunter, he'd said over the phone. He's not going to rush. He's tracking the scent. Then on the 8th day it appeared. The headline was subtle, professional, and utterly devastating. A question of color is the Vance collection upholding its own legacy. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled through the article. Morrison had done his homework. He'd spoken to Alistair Finch, the owner of the Corvette. He'd consulted factory paint code archives. He'd interviewed other restoration experts. He never once accused Julian of fraud. He simply laid out the facts, presenting them as a series of troubling questions. He wrote about the rally red paint, confirming it was a 2066 color. He questioned the fully restored original engine claim, pointing out the non-original carburetor. He ended the piece not with a conclusion, but with a haunting question. The Vance name has always been a guarantee of unimpeachable authenticity. The question for collectors now is, does that guarantee still stand under its new commercially minded management? The ripples started almost immediately. The comments section of the blog exploded. Other car forums picked up the story. It was exactly as we'd planned, not a fire, but a thick, choking smoke of doubt. Henry called me that afternoon, a note of triumph in his voice. The bulldog bit Elias. And he bit hard. I said, my eyes still glued to the screen. Now we watch the target, Henry said. Let's see how he reacts under pressure. We didn't have to wait long. That evening, Julian responded. He didn't do it quietly. He issued a formal press release, posted across all of Vanessa's social media channels. It was a masterpiece of corporate arrogance. He dismissed the article as the petty ramblings of a so-called purist who doesn't understand the modern collectibles market. He called the paint color an artistic homage, and the carburetor a performance-based upgrade for the modern driver. He didn't address the questions. He attacked the questioner. He ended the statement with a flourish of defiance. The Vance collection stands by its products and its integrity. The upcoming sale of the Shelby GT 500 at Barrett-Jackson, the finest vehicle we have ever produced, will serve as the ultimate answer to these baseless insinuations. I read the statement twice, then leaned back in my chair. It was better than I could have hoped for. Instead of quietly addressing the concerns and reassuring his clients, he had picked a public fight. He had shown arrogance instead of humility. And most importantly, he had tied his entire reputation, his entire defense to the fate of the Shelby. He had just publicly announced to the world that he was betting everything on a single hand. A hand he didn't know was already lost. The phone rang the next morning. It was a private number, but I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times before picking up, giving myself a moment to settle my nerves and put on the calm, detached persona Henry and I had rehearsed. "Hello, you did this?" Julian's voice was a low snarl, stripped of all its corporate polish. It was the raw, ragged anger of a cornered animal. Don't even try to deny it. That blogger, the questions about the Corvette, it has your fingerprints all over it. "I don't know what you're talking about, Julian," I said, my voice deliberately mild. I read the article, of course. It seems Mr. Morrison is a very thorough journalist. Thorough? He's a parasite. And you fed him the information. He shouted. I could hear the clink of ice in a glass on his end. He was drinking. Good. You're trying to sabotage me. Trying to ruin the Shelby sale. Why would I do that? I asked, injecting a note of weary sadness into my voice. The Shelby is one of my greatest works. Its success is a testament to my legacy. Don't give me that legacy garbage, he spat. You're a bitter old man, and you're trying to burn everything down because you couldn't stand to see me succeed without you. Is that what you think this is? I asked quietly. Success, hiding shortcuts and attacking anyone who asks a question. I am building a brand. Something you never understood, he raged. And I will not let you destroy it. It sounds to me like your brand is destroying itself, I said calmly. You were the one who used the wrong paint, Julian. You were the one who put in the wrong carburetor. You were the one who lied in the sales brochure. All I ever did was teach you to tell the truth. There was a moment of sputtering silence on his end, the sound of a man so consumed by rage he couldn't form a coherent thought. You're done, he finally hissed. After this auction, when that Shelby breaks every record, your opinion won't matter anymore. You'll just be a footnote, the bitter old man who couldn't keep up. And with that, he slammed the phone down. I slowly placed the receiver back in its cradle. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. The conversation had gone exactly as Henry had predicted. I had denied nothing, admitted nothing, and in doing so I had confirmed all of his deepest fears. He was now convinced I was his secret enemy. The paranoia was taking root. What a powerful turning point for Elias. If you're enjoying his story of resilience so far, letting us know with a simple like would mean the world. The first crack in his armor had appeared. He was no longer the confident predator I had seen at the showcase. He was rattled, angry, and drinking in the morning. He was making mistakes, and he was still heading straight for the biggest stage in the world, convinced it would be his salvation. He had no idea it was a trap of his own making. Phase 1 was complete. Now it was time to prepare for Phase 2. The phone call with Julian left a strange silence in its wake. It was the silence of a trap, sprung the quiet moment after the steel jaws have snapped shut. I hadn't needed to raise my voice or make a single threat. His own paranoia was now doing the work for me, eating away at him from the inside. I updated Henry, who chuckled with the satisfaction of a lawyer who appreciates a well-executed plan. He's bleeding, Henry said over the phone. And a wounded animal is a predictable animal. He's going to get reckless. Just watch. And Henry was right. The whispers we had started began to bear fruit in strange and wonderful ways. I had friends, old friends, scattered all over the country in the restoration business. Men I'd known for 40 years who valued a perfect weld seam more than a stock portfolio. My phone started to ring. First it was a call from a buddy in Florida. Elias, you won't believe this, he said. Julian Vance called me yesterday. Asked if I would be willing to independently appraise and verify a few of his restorations. He was offering a very generous fee. And what did you tell him? I asked, already knowing the answer. I told him my eyesight isn't what it used to be, but it's still good enough to know that only one man can certify an Elias Vance car, and that's Elias Vance. He hung up on me. 2 days later, another call, this time from a parts supplier in Michigan. Got a weird request from your son's company, Eli. They're looking for a batch of pre-1966 Holley carburetors. The real ones, not the reproductions. They're offering triple the market rate. Sounds like someone's trying to clean up a mess. Each call was another nail in Julian's self-made coffin. Consumed by the paranoia that I was orchestrating a grand conspiracy against him, he was now scrambling to retroactively fix the shortcuts he had taken. He was trying to erase the lies, but in our world, the truth, like a car's original VIN plate, can't be faked. You either have it or you don't. His frantic attempts to create authenticity only highlighted his lack of it. He was spending a fortune trying to plug a leak, all while the dam itself was about to break. He didn't realize that the problem wasn't a single car, a single lie. The problem was his entire philosophy, and that couldn't be fixed with a new carburetor or a bought and paid for appraisal. I relayed all of this to Henry, who listened with quiet satisfaction. He's panicking, Henry concluded. The smoke from our little fire is making him tear his own house apart, looking for the source while the main gas line is still leaking. He's making it easy for us, I said. Pride is a powerful anesthetic, Elias Henry replied. It numbs a man to his own foolishness. I hung up the phone and walked to my small workshop. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. I looked at the half-finished Porsche, a project of pure passion, not profit. Julian was running around, throwing money at his problems, trying to manufacture a story. And I was here in the quiet of my garage, holding the one thing he could never buy, the truth. The whisper had done its job. The foundation was cracked. Now all I had to do was wait for the right moment to push, and the whole rotten structure would come tumbling down. Julian's frantic attempts to rewrite history stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The phone calls to my friends ceased. A strange, tense quiet settled over his side of the driveway. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the silence of a predator gathering itself for a final, desperate lunge. It made me uneasy. I called Henry. "He's gone quiet," I said. "It's not like him. Arrogance doesn't just evaporate." "No, it doesn't," Henry agreed. "It just finds a new strategy. He's realized he can't plug the leaks, so now he's trying to outrun the flood. Let me make a few calls. The financial world is a small town, Elias. Secrets don't stay secret for long." A week later, Henry summoned me back to his office. The moment I walked in, I knew he'd found something. The mischievous glint in his eye was gone, replaced by a look of grim seriousness. "It's worse than we thought," he said, skipping the pleasantries and gesturing for me to sit. "I spoke with a friend of mine who works in commercial risk assessment. Julian is in deep." He slid a folder across the desk. It was thin, but I knew its contents would be heavy. "That tip from your grandson Alex was just the tip of the iceberg," Henry explained. "It wasn't just one bad investment, it was a series of them. High-risk tech startups, cryptocurrency. The kind of flashy gambles that look great on paper until they don't know. He's been using the business as collateral, borrowing heavily against the projected value of his inventory." "The cars," I breathed. "The cars," Henry confirmed. "And after the whispers we started, his creditors are getting nervous. The value of his collateral is now in question. They're not just calling him. They're starting to issue formal demands. He's facing a margin call, Elias. A big one." The legal term was unfamiliar, but the meaning was crystal clear. The wolves were at the door. "So the Shelby auction," I began. "It's not just about saving his reputation anymore," Henry finished for me. "It's about avoiding total financial ruin. He needs that sale to be a record breaker. He needs that money to pay off his creditors before they force him into bankruptcy and liquidate the entire collection for pennies on the dollar." A cold feeling washed over me. This was no longer just a lesson in humility. The stakes had been raised to a level I had never intended. I had wanted to teach my son a lesson, not obliterate his entire life. A flicker of doubt, the first I'd felt in weeks, entered my mind. Was I going too far? "This changes things, Henry," I said, my voice low. "Yes, it does," he said, his eyes watching me carefully. "It makes him more dangerous, more desperate. But it doesn't change the core of our strategy. The truth is still the truth. He's the one who took the gamble, Elias. He's the one who leveraged your name, your work, to fund his mistakes." He leaned forward. "The question is, does this change your resolve?" Henry's question followed me home and haunted me for the next 2 days. Did it change my resolve? I sat in my quiet house, the silence no longer peaceful but filled with doubt. I had wanted to teach Julian a lesson, not push him off a financial cliff. I thought of him not as the arrogant businessman, but as the 10-year-old boy in the photograph, full of hope and admiration. Could I be the one to extinguish that light forever, even if it had grown dim and distorted? The face of my late wife, Martha, swam in my memory. She would have been heartbroken. "He's still our son, Elias," I could almost hear her say. "There's always a way back." My carefully constructed blueprint for justice now felt like a blueprint for cruelty. The cold, clear purpose I had felt was now muddied with the messy, complicated feelings of a father. For the first time, I considered calling the whole thing off. I could call Henry, tell him to stand down. I could let the auction proceed, let Julian have his desperate victory, and simply walk away from it all. Maybe that was the real victory, choosing mercy over justice. I was turning this thought over in my mind, my hand hovering over the phone, when a sleek, white SUV I recognized pulled into my driveway. It was Vanessa. I hadn't spoken to her since the night of the showcase. My heart sank. She got out of the car, dressed impeccably as always, but there was a tension in her posture I hadn't seen before. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle facade. She walked up to my porch, her heels clicking with an aggressive rhythm. I opened the door before she could knock. "Elias," she said, her tone devoid of any warmth, "we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Vanessa," I said, blocking the doorway. "Oh, I think there is," she said, her eyes scanning the simple, worn interior of my home with a look of faint disgust. "I know what you're doing. This little whisper campaign, the questions, the doubts. It's you. It's pathetic, and it needs to stop." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice flat. Her painted smile was a thin, hard line. "Don't play dumb with me. Julian is under a lot of pressure right now. This auction is everything. For him, for me, for your grandson." The mention of Alex was a low blow, and she knew it. "You wouldn't want to be the reason Alex's future is put in jeopardy, would you?" she continued, her voice a silky threat. "All the opportunities he has, the college he attends. It's all because of the business. Your little games could destroy that." I looked at this woman who saw my grandson not as a person but as a bargaining chip. In that moment, all my doubt, all my merciful inclinations evaporated. She wasn't here to appeal to me as a father. She was here to threaten me as a grandfather. She and Julian hadn't learned a single thing. They were still using the people I loved as leverage. My resolve, which had been wavering, hardened again, this time into something unbreakable. "You need to leave Vanessa," I said, my voice so cold it surprised even me. Her smile faltered. She had expected me to crumble. "Don't say I didn't warn you," she snapped, her composure finally breaking. "And don't you ever," I said, taking a step forward, my shadow falling over her, "mention my grandson's name in your threats again." She recoiled, as if struck, turned on her heel, and stalked back to her car. As she sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake, my mind was clear. The question had been answered. My resolve hadn't changed. It had been forged anew in the fire of her contempt. After Vanessa's visit, a strange calm settled over me. The moral wrestling was over. She had shown me their true colors, and in doing so had freed me from any lingering sense of fatherly guilt. My path was clear, my purpose solidified. I no longer felt like an aggressor. I felt like a necessary counterbalance to their greed and cruelty. I spent the next few days in my workshop focusing on the Porsche with Alex. The simple, honest work was a tonic for my soul. We didn't talk about Julian or Vanessa. We talked about engine timing, about the unique properties of German steel, about the philosophy of finding the straightest line through a corner. We talked about things that were real. It was Alex who brought me the news during one of our weekend sessions. He was quieter than usual, a troubled look in his eyes. "Everything all right, kid?" I asked, sliding a tray of cleaned carburetor jets towards him. He sighed, picking one up and inspecting it. "It's weird at the house, Grandpa." "Weird how they're fighting," he said, not looking at me. "A lot. More than usual. Mom blames Dad for the financial mess. Dad blames her for her obsession with appearances that forced him to spend so much." He gave a short, bitter laugh, as if he's not obsessed with the same thing. I stopped what I was doing and gave him my full attention. "Last night was a bad one," he continued, his voice low. "Mom was yelling about how her entire brand, her blog, her social standing is tied to that house and the Vance name. She said Dad was ruining her. He threw a glass against the wall. Said he was the one trying to hold everything together while she just posted pictures." I felt a pang of sadness, not for them, but for my grandson, caught in the crossfire of their imploding world. "I'm sorry you have to hear that, Alex," I said softly. "It's whatever he said, trying to sound tough, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. The worst part is they're not even talking about what's right or wrong. It's just about the money, about who's to blame for losing it." He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and disgust. "They built this whole perfect life, but it's like a house of cards, isn't it? And someone just pulled one out from the bottom." He didn't know that I was that someone. He didn't know the whisper I had started had grown into a storm that was now tearing through his parents' marriage. I felt a surge of cold power, but it was immediately tempered by the sight of my grandson's pain. My actions were having consequences, ripples spreading out in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. "Houses of cards fall, Alex," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's what they do. The important thing is to build your life on something solid, something real, like this engine." He nodded, understanding my meaning, and we went back to work. But as we worked, I knew that the cracks in Julian's empire were spreading faster than I had thought. The pressure from the outside was causing it to crumble from within. The alliance between him and Vanessa, built on a shared ambition for wealth and status, was shattering under the weight of their impending failure. The cracks in Julian's marriage were just a symptom of the larger decay. His world, once so carefully curated and presented, was falling apart at the seams. He was bleeding financially, his reputation was under attack, and his home life was imploding. A rational man would have cut his losses, sought a truce, tried to salvage what was left. But Julian was not a rational man. He was a gambler who had mistaken a winning streak for genius, and now, faced with losing everything, he did what all desperate gamblers do. He decided to go all in. The first sign was the sudden escalation of the marketing campaign for the Shelby. It was no longer just a few posts on Vanessa's blog. Suddenly, glossy full-page ads appeared in every major car magazine, featuring dramatic, artfully lit photos of the car. The tagline was always the same: the pinnacle of the Vance legacy, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Then came the exclusive interviews Julian gave to friendly online publications. He spoke with a feverish, almost manic confidence. He spun the whispers we had started as attacks from jealous competitors and dinosaurs who fear the future of the collectibles market. He framed the upcoming auction not just as a sale but as a validation, a final definitive answer to all the doubters. He wasn't just selling a car anymore. He was selling a narrative of his own triumph over adversity. It was a bold, reckless strategy. He was taking all the doubt, all the pressure, all the negative attention, and trying to channel it into a single spectacular event. He believed that if he could just get a record-breaking price for the Shelby, it would silence all the critics, reassure his creditors, and solve all his problems in one fell swoop. He was betting the farm, the house, and his entire future on the fall of a single gavel. I watched all of this unfold from the quiet of my study, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. It was like watching an old film I had seen 100 times, the kind where the protagonist makes one fatal flaw after another, marching inexorably towards a doom that only the audience can see. He was so busy building his own legend that he had become completely blind to the reality of his situation. He had forgotten the most basic rule of the world we lived in, a rule I had tried to teach him when he was just a boy. You can't fake quality. You can't market your way around a flawed foundation. All the fancy ads and soaring rhetoric in the world couldn't change the simple hard fact that the car's ultimate value was tied to a single leather-bound book. A book he possessed but did not control. He had pushed all his chips to the center of the table. He was smiling, confident, ready for the final hand to be dealt. He had no idea that I was the one holding the deck, and I had already decided which card would come up last. With the date of the auction looming, the time for quiet observation was over. It was time to prepare the final, decisive move. I met Henry at his office one last time before I was due to fly to Arizona. The mood was different now. The initial excitement of a clever strategy had been replaced by the grim focus of two old soldiers preparing for a necessary battle. "He's done exactly what we predicted," Henry said, gesturing to a stack of magazines on his desk, each with a glossy ad for the Shelby. "He's built his own stage, invited the whole world to watch, and placed his neck squarely in the noose. All we have to do is kick the stool out from under him." "I want to be clear, Henry," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "This has to be clean. It has to be legally unassailable. I don't want this to turn into a messy, protracted fight. I want it to be a single, clean cut. It will be," Henry assured me, tapping a neatly bound legal document on his desk. "I've drafted the formal notice to be served to the auction house. It's a cease and desist citing trademark infringement and misrepresentation of authenticity. We're not questioning his ownership of the car. We are questioning his legal right to sell it as a VANT-certified vehicle without the explicit final sign-off from the certifying authority, which is you." "And the timing?" I asked. "That's the crucial part," he said, leaning forward. "We can't serve it too early or he'll have time to pull the car, manage the damage, and spin the story. We can't serve it too late after the gavel falls, because then we're in a legal mess with a new owner. It has to be in the most dramatic, most public, and most legally binding moment possible. While the car is on the block, I finished for him." "Precisely," Henry said with a thin smile. "While the bidding is at its peak, right before the final gavel. My associate in Phoenix, a very discreet and very theatrical man, will handle the delivery in person. He will walk onto that stage and hand the notice directly to the auctioneer. The auction house's own rules will force them to stop the sale immediately to avoid liability." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the plan settling in the room. It was a ruthless plan designed for maximum impact, for maximum humiliation. The doubt I had felt after Vanessa's visit was long gone, but in its place was a heavy sense of responsibility. "Are you sure about this?" Elias Henry asked, his voice softening for the first time. "There's no going back from this." I thought of Alex, of the quiet pride in his eyes as he worked on the Porsche. I thought of the arrogant dismissal in Julian's voice. I thought of the word obsolete. "I'm sure, Henry," I said. "Some lessons can only be taught the hard way." He nodded, satisfied. He handed me a copy of the legal notice and a business card. "This is my associate's number. Call him when you land. He'll know what to do." I took the papers. They felt heavy in my hand, heavier than any tool I had ever held. They were the instruments of a different kind of restoration, not of a car, but of a name. The legal documents felt both feather-light and heavy as lead in my hands. They were just paper, but they held the power to unravel an empire. Henry had given me the instructions for his associate in Phoenix, a man named Mr. Davies, discreet and efficient. My flight to Phoenix was uneventful, a quiet transition from the crisp autumn air of Connecticut to the sprawling sun-baked landscape of the Arizona desert. As the plane descended, the familiar green-wooded hills gave way to the endless, dusty expanse punctuated by saguaro cacti reaching for the vast sky. It felt like entering a different world, an arena under a vast, unforgiving sun. I'd rented a simple, anonymous sedan at the airport and drove towards Scottsdale, the air conditioning blasting against the dry heat. Even miles away, I could feel the energy of the event, a low thrum of power and money, a vibration in the air itself. The auction grounds were a sprawling city of white tents, polished chrome, and shimmering paint. The air was thick with the smell of high-octane fuel, expensive cologne, and the lingering scent of desert dust. Thousands of people milled about a restless sea of collectors, investors, and dreamers, all drawn by the siren song of rare and beautiful machines. It was a circus, and Julian was preparing to be the ringmaster. I checked into a modest motel a few miles away, a place where no one would know my name. From there, I was a ghost. My first call was to Mr. Davies Henry's man. His voice was calm, professional. "Everything is in place, Mr. Vance. I have the notice. I know the target. I'll be in position." He gave me a time and a section where I could find him for the final handover before the main event. I spent the first day just walking the grounds, a baseball cap pulled low over my eyes, a pair of dark sunglasses shielding my gaze. I wanted to see Julian and Vanessa to gauge their confidence, their desperation. I found them near the main stage, holding court in a roped-off VIP section surrounded by men in expensive suits. They were laughing, confident, pointing out features on a multi-million-dollar Ferrari. They were in their element, swimming in the very waters they were born for, believing their victory was assured. Julian, in a perfectly tailored suit, was animated, charismatic, a master showman. Vanessa, radiant and impeccably dressed, hung on his arm, her smile dazzling for the television cameras that occasionally panned across their section. They looked like the epitome of success, the very image they had spent years cultivating. I felt no anger watching them, only a profound surgical calm. They were so busy building their facade that they couldn't see the ground beneath their feet was about to crumble. They had no idea the foundations were about to turn to sand. That evening, back in the quiet, sterile anonymity of my motel room, the weight of what I was about to do finally settled on me. The surgical calm I had felt during the day gave way to a profound sense of melancholy. This wasn't a game. This was my family. And tomorrow I was going to detonate a bomb in the middle of it. I found myself staring at the phone, my hand hovering over it. I needed an anchor, a reminder of why this was necessary. I dialed Alex's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, Grandpa. Are you there?" His voice was a welcome warmth in the cold room. "I'm here, kid," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't expected. "Just calling to check in." "Is it tomorrow?" he asked, his voice low. He knew. Of course he knew. He was smart enough to put the pieces together. "Yes. It's tomorrow." There was a pause on the line, the silence stretching between Connecticut and Arizona. "Are you going to hurt him?" Alex asked the question, so direct, so full of a child's simple morality that it took my breath away. I thought for a long moment before answering. "No, Alex," I said finally. "I'm not going to hurt him. The truth is going to hurt him. There's a difference." "Because of the certificates?" he asked. I was taken aback. "How did you know about those I told you? I've been reading your notebooks," he said. "The real ones. You wrote about it. How the book is the car's soul. How the signature is the promise." He paused again, then said something that shook me to my core. He forgot the promise, didn't he, Grandpa? The wisdom of youth. He had distilled the entire complicated, painful mess down to its simplest, most essential truth. He forgot the promise. "Yes, son," I said, my throat tightening. "He forgot the promise." "Then you're doing the right thing," Alex said, with a certainty that belied his age. "It's not about the money. It's about the promise. You taught me that." My eyes welled up. I had thought I was doing this to teach Julian a lesson, but in that moment I realized the more important lesson was the one I had already taught Alex. The legacy wasn't lost. It was safe. It had found the right home. "You're a good man, Alex," I said, my voice choked with pride. "You're going to be a better man than I ever was." "Nah," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm just trying to be like you." We hung up, and the melancholy was gone, washed away by a profound sense of peace. The doubts, the guilt, the sadness, they all vanished. My purpose was crystal clear again. I wasn't doing this out of revenge. I was doing it for Alex. I was doing it to defend the very idea of a promise. I was doing it to ensure that the world my grandson would inherit was one where a man's signature still meant something. The lesson tomorrow was no longer just for Julian. It was for everyone. The morning of the auction dawned bright and hot, the Arizona sun beating down with an intensity that felt absolute. I ate a simple breakfast at a diner, nursing a cup of black coffee, feeling strangely calm. The storm inside me had passed, leaving a quiet, clear purpose. Today was not about emotion. It was about execution. I met Mr. Davies at a pre-arranged spot, a quiet corner near the vast parking lots. He was exactly as his voice had suggested, calm, professional, and utterly discreet. He was holding a sleek leather briefcase. "Mr. Vance," he said with a slight nod, "everything is in order. The notice is here." He patted the briefcase. "I have my credentials for the stage. All I need is your final go-ahead." "You'll have it," I said. "The car is lot number 742. It's scheduled for the primetime block around 5 o'clock, 42. I'll be inside. When you see the bidding peak right before the final call, that's when you move." "Understood," he said. "I will be watching." We shook hands, a brief firm gesture, and then he melted back into the growing crowd. I arrived at the auction hall hours before the Shelby was scheduled. The main tent was already a pulsating hive of energy. The air vibrated with the auctioneer's rhythmic chant, a hypnotic cadence of numbers and exhortations that echoed off the canvas ceiling. Spotlights swept across the crowd, glinting off jewelry watches and the hopeful eyes of bidders. I didn't take a seat in the plush rows reserved for serious buyers. Instead, I found a spot to stand at the very back, near a service exit half hidden by a large speaker stack. From here I could see everything: the main stage where fortunes were made and lost, the digital board flashing ever-increasing numbers, and the VIP section where Julian and Vanessa were already holding court. They were a picture of success, radiating a tense, high-strung confidence. Julian, in a tailored blazer, looked intense and focused, a general in his command tent before the final battle. Vanessa was a vision in white, a gracious hostess at her own coronation. They were playing their parts to perfection, unaware that the script had already been rewritten. I watched as a procession of incredible machines rolled across the block. A canary-yellow Lamborghini Countach, sold for a price that could have bought my entire neighborhood. A cherry-red Corvette from the 50s sparked a bidding war that had the crowd on its feet. With each strike of the gavel, the energy in the room ratcheted up another notch. The afternoon wore on a slow, deliberate march towards the appointed hour. The sun began to dip, low, casting long shadows. The primetime slots were approaching the hours when the biggest money was spent. My heart remained a steady, slow drum. I was a craftsman, and this was just another project. Every step had been measured, every component checked. Now all that was left was the final assembly. A murmur went through the crowd as a classic Duesenberg was rolled away. The auctioneer took a sip of water, his eyes scanning the schedule. My gaze flickered to the side of the stage, and for a split second I saw Mr. Davies standing perfectly still in the shadows, waiting. "All right, folks, settle in," the auctioneer's amplified voice boomed, silencing the chatter. "The next item on the block is a very special one, a legend. Lot number 742, the 1,967 Shelby GT 500, the crown jewel of the Vance collection." My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. The side doors to the stage began to open. It was time. The side doors slid open, and a wave of cool air washed over the crowd. Then she emerged. Under the intense glare of a dozen spotlights, the Shelby GT 500 rolled onto the rotating stage, a black predator moving through a sea of light. The engine wasn't running. Two attendants in black uniforms pushed her silently into position. The crowd let out a collective, appreciative sigh. Even here, surrounded by automotive royalty, she was something special. I knew every curve of that car by heart. I had shaped them, sanded them, painted them. I had spent 5 years of my life breathing life back into that machine. Seeing her there, presented as a mere commodity, felt like watching a stranger parade my own child across a stage. A deep primal possessiveness rose in me, but I pushed it down with icy resolve. This was the final act. The auctioneer launched into his pitch, his voice a torrent of superlatives. A numbers-matching 428 Cobra jet engine, ladies and gentlemen. 4-speed manual. Fully documented nut and bolt rotisserie restoration by the legendary Elias Vance himself. He then surprised me. And now a few words from the man who is carrying that legacy into the future, the CEO of Vance Automotive Investments, Mr. Julian Vance. Julian, beaming, stepped onto the stage and took a microphone. This was his moment of ultimate triumph. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "This car is more than just a car. It's the pinnacle of a philosophy. It's a testament to a name that has always meant excellence. A legacy my father started, and one which I am proud to evolve for the modern era." He gestured grandly at the car. "Tonight, one lucky person will not just buy a car. They will buy a piece of history, a piece of the Vance legend. He handed the microphone back, his eyes sweeping the crowd, soaking in the applause. He was selling them a story, and they were eating it up. He was so confident, so utterly sure of himself. He had no idea the legend was about to bite back. "All right, folks, the moment of truth," the auctioneer shouted, reclaiming the stage. "Where do we want to start on this masterpiece? The pre-auction interest is already at $1 million. Who will give me $1 million to start?" A hand in the front row shot up. $1 million. Thank you, sir. Now 1.1. 1 on the phone, yes, 1.2 from the gentleman in the back. 1.3 on the internet bid. 1.4 on the phone again. The numbers on the giant screen blurred, climbing at a dizzying pace. It was a whirlwind of money and adrenaline. I remained perfectly still in the shadows, my eyes fixed on the stage, my heart a steady, slow drum against the frantic rhythm of the auction. This was their moment of glory. It was essential that they reach the absolute peak before the fall. 1.819, $2 million. "We have $2 million, ladies and gentlemen." A roar went through the crowd. In the VIP section, Vanessa was on her feet, clapping her face ecstatic. Julian stood with his arms crossed, a look of supreme vindicated pride on his face. He had done it. He had beaten the whispers, the doubts, and his obsolete old father, or so he thought. The $2 million mark, which would have been a triumph, was just a stepping stone. The auctioneer, sensing a historic sale, barely paused for breath. $2 million on the phone. Who will give me 2-1? 2-1 right here in the room. Yes, the gentleman in the blue jacket. Now 2-2, 2-2 on the internet bid. The numbers climbed with a relentless, brutal speed. 2.3, 2.4. The crowd was a single roaring entity caught up in the spectacle of immense wealth being thrown at a piece of steel and paint. My steel and paint, I stood in the shadows, my heart a steady, cold metronome against the frantic, chaotic rhythm of the bidding. I watched Julian. He was no longer just proud. He was transfigured, his face glowing with a kind of ecstatic vindication. This was his absolution, his coronation, all happening at once. 2.5 million on the phone, and 2.6 from the gentleman in blue. He's back in a new bidder at 2.7. On the internet, 2.8 on the phone. The original bidders had dropped out, replaced by the heavy hitters, the ones who didn't even blink at seven-figure sums. It was a battle of egos now, and my Shelby was their chosen weapon. $3 million, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice cracking with excitement. "We have $3 million on the phone." The entire tent erupted. A wave of sound washed over me. 3 million. It was a number that defied comprehension, a sum that could build hospitals, fund schools, and it was being offered for a car. I saw Julian throw his head back and laugh, a raw, triumphant sound of pure, unadulterated victory. He hugged Vanessa, lifting her off her feet. This was it, the moment he had gambled everything on. He had won. $3 million on the phone, the auctioneer chanted, his voice a frantic gallop. "Do I hear 3.1, 3.1 anywhere? Fair warning, I'm selling the car." He scanned the room. The gentleman in the blue jacket slowly shook his head. The internet bidding board went dark. It was over. $3 million, he cried. Going once, I watched Julian's face etched in the harsh glare of the spotlights. He was immortal in that moment. Going twice, my gaze flickered to the side of the stage. In the deep shadows, a figure detached himself from the wall. Mr. Davies began to move calm and purposeful. "Last chance," the auctioneer shouted, his voice reaching a crescendo. SOL then for $3 million. The heavy wooden gavel raised high above his head, a wooden judge ready to deliver its final definitive verdict. In that split second, as the tool of finality began its descent, I saw Julian's triumphant smile, the look of a man who believed he had just conquered the world. He was wrong. The gavel hung in the air, a suspended moment of absolute victory for my son. The entire tent seemed to hold its breath with him. But the sharp crack of wood on the podium never came. "Mr. Davies moved with a quiet urgency that was more commanding than any shout. He didn't run. He walked onto the stage as if he owned it. He handed the single-folded document from his briefcase to one of the auction officials, who glanced at it, his eyes widening in alarm. The official immediately rushed to the auctioneer and whispered urgently in his ear just as the gavel was about to fall. The auctioneer's arm, still raised, seemed to freeze in midair. The triumphant smile on his face faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. He lowered the gavel slowly, placing it on the podium with a soft, uncertain thud. The sudden silence was a shock wave that rolled through the crowd. Murmurs erupted, a low buzz of confusion, like disturbed hornets. I saw Julian's expression shift from triumph to irritation, then to concern. He gestured to Vanessa, a sharp, questioning motion. What was this? A delay? A technicality? The auctioneer cleared his throat, the sound echoing unnaturally in the vast, quiet tent. The television cameras, sensing drama, zoomed in on his face, then panned to Julian, whose face had gone rigid, the color starting to drain from it. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer began, his professional cadence gone, his voice now tight and cautious. We have just been served with a legal notice regarding lot 742. The murmuring grew louder. I am legally obligated to read this statement, the auctioneer continued, his eyes fixed on the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Ahem. Be it known that the vehicle in question, the 1967 Shelby GT 500 VIN number 7 KR20 Farad, does not at this time possess a valid and authenticated certificate of provenance and restoration history from its original restorer, Mr. Elias Vance. A collective gasp went through the crowd. In the world of high-end classic cars, those words were a death sentence. It was like announcing a Rembrandt was just a very good copy. The $3 million bid on the screen suddenly seemed like a joke. The auctioneer wasn't finished. He took a shaky breath. Without said certificate signed and validated by Mr. Vance, the Barrett-Jackson auction house cannot and will not guarantee the vehicle's restoration history, its component parts, or its overall authenticity as a Vance-certified vehicle. He looked up, his face pale, under the stage lights, and delivered the final blow. Therefore, the current auction of this lot is hereby suspended and invalidated. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where a celebration should have been. Then chaos, angry shouts from the bidders, a storm of whispers and speculation rippling through the audience. The cameras were no longer on the car. They were fixed on Julian. His face was ashen, a mask of disbelief and horror. Vanessa stood frozen beside him, her hand half raised to her mouth, her perfect smile shattered into a million pieces. Through the chaos, his eyes wide with panic scanned the crowd and finally found mine standing in the shadows at the back of the tent. There was no anger left in them, only the hollow, echoing emptiness of total and absolute defeat. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. The lesson was complete. I held his gaze for a moment longer, letting the message pass between us in the chaotic silence. Then I turned my back on the chaos on the stage, on the wreckage of my son's ambition, and began to walk. No one noticed me. All eyes were still glued to the stage, to the unfolding drama of Julian's public disgrace. As I moved toward the exit, fragments of conversation reached me sharp and clear in the charged atmosphere. I always said there was something off about that kid. Heard he was in deep with some bad investments. This must be the fallout. Complete professional suicide. In front of the whole world. Poor Elias. Can you imagine his own son? The voices faded behind me as I pushed through the heavy canvas flap of the tent and stepped out into the cool desert night. The contrast was startling. Inside was a pressure cooker of panic and rumor. Out here was the vast, indifferent silence of the desert, the sky a blanket of stars so bright they seemed almost close enough to touch. The cool desert air was a balm on my skin. I had expected to feel triumphant. I had expected a surge of adrenaline, of righteous satisfaction. But I didn't. There was only a quiet, hollow emptiness. The scales had been balanced, but the act of balancing them had been ugly and loud. The lesson had been taught, but the price of admission was the public destruction of my own son. A profound sense of regret, cold and heavy, settled in my gut. This wasn't the clean victory Henry and I had planned. It was a demolition. I had set out to teach a lesson about integrity, but I had used tools of humiliation and strategic cruelty. In that moment, I felt a kinship with Julian that I hadn't felt in years. He had used my name for his own gain, and I had just used it to bring about his ruin. We were both guilty of weaponizing the legacy. The crunch of gravel under my shoes was the only sound as I crossed the enormous, half-empty parking lot. I found my rented sedan, a beige, forgettable car in a sea of peacocks, and slid behind the wheel. The engine started with a quiet, anonymous hum. It was just a machine to get me from one place to another. There was a simple honesty in that which I found comforting. I pulled out onto the main road, heading back toward the quiet anonymity of my motel. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove, watching the dark shapes of the saguaro cacti slide past like ancient sentinels. I thought of the look on Julian's face, the utter devastation. There was no pride left, no arrogance, just the raw, terrified look of a boy who had lost everything. The boy I had once taught how to hold a wrench. In the rearview mirror, the intense glow of the auction tents shrank until it was just another star in the vast, dark desert. I didn't look back again. The show was over. The justice I had sought felt like a victory, but it tasted like ashes. The harsh Arizona sun faded into a memory replaced by the gentle green spring of Connecticut. The story of Julian's spectacular failure at Barrett-Jackson had become a legend in the car world, a cautionary tale whispered at every auction and car show. I heard through the grapevine that he had lost his biggest investors and was forced to sell off most of his collection at a steep discount just to stay afloat. He and Vanessa had put the big house on the market. I never heard from him, not a word. The regret I felt that night in the desert slowly over time transformed into a quiet, aching sadness. My world, in contrast, had become smaller, quieter, and infinitely richer. I didn't try to get the main garage back. It was tainted now, a monument to greed. Instead, I cleaned out the small two-car workshop behind my house, the one where it all began. I dragged my old tools out of storage, the ones with worn wooden handles that fit my grip perfectly. The air inside soon smelled right again, of oil, sawdust, and honest work. My apprentice started on weekends. Alex would drive over from college, his face eager, his hands ready to learn. He wasn't like Julian. He didn't see the cars as assets. He saw them as puzzles, as histories, as living things. He had the touch. "So the distributor rotor isn't making consistent contact," he said one Saturday afternoon, his head buried in the engine bay of a dusty old Porsche 356 we'd bought for a song. "The timing is all over the place. I think the shaft might be warped." I leaned over my eyes, tracing the lines he was pointing at. "Could be," I said, a smile tugging at my lips. "Or it could be something simpler. Did you check the condenser?" He pulled his head out, a smudge of grease on his nose. "The condenser," but the manual said. "The manual gives you the theory," I interrupted gently. "The car gives you the truth. Always listen to the car first." I handed him a small, canister-shaped part from my toolbox. "Try this one. See what she tells you." He swapped the part, his movements becoming more confident each week. When he reconnected the battery and turned the key, the engine, which had been sputtering and coughing, settled into a smooth, steady purr. The sound was sweeter than any applause from any auction house. Alex's face broke into a wide, triumphant grin. It was the same grin from the photograph on my mantelpiece, the one with the 10-year-old boy and the big wrench. It was finally in the right place again. "I don't get it," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "How did you know? You spend 50 years listening," I said, clapping a hand on his shoulder, "and eventually you start to understand the language." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of metal on metal and the soft rock playing on an old radio. The sun streamed through the open garage door, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. This was my legacy, not the 7-figure auctions or the glossy magazine features. It was this, passing on the language. The hollow feeling in my chest, the one that had been there since that night in Arizona, was finally gone. It was replaced by the simple solid weight of a wrench in my hand and the bright, hopeful future I saw in my grandson's eyes. The summer was drawing to a close, the days getting shorter, the golden afternoon light lingering in the workshop. We were just finishing up for the day, Alex carefully wiping down a wrench before placing it back on the pegboard. The Porsche's engine was now a thing of beauty, a testament to months of patient work. Our work. A car pulled into the driveway, its engine quiet, hesitant. It wasn't a luxury car. It was a simple domestic sedan, a few years old, with a small dent in the rear fender. Julian stepped out. He looked different. The expensive blazer was gone, replaced by a simple polo shirt. The confident, aggressive posture had been replaced by a stooped weariness. He looked tired. He looked for the first time in a long time like my son. Alex tensed beside me, his hand tightening on the wrench. I placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, kid. Why don't you go wash up inside?" Alex hesitated, shot a worried glance at me, then a defiant one at his father before nodding and heading toward my house. Julian walked slowly to the entrance of the open garage, stopping at the edge where the sunlight met the shadow. He just stood there for a moment, looking not at me but at the Porsche, at the neat rows of tools, at the organized chaos of a real workshop. "It looks good in here," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual bravado. "It looks like it used to." "It feels like it used to," I replied, my voice even. He finally met my eyes. There was no anger there, no resentment, just a deep, hollowed-out shame. I lost everything, Dad," he said the words, barely a whisper. "The house, the clients, the collection. Vanessa, she's staying with her sister." "I heard," I said. The satisfaction I thought I might feel was absent. There was only a profound aching sadness for the wreckage he had made of his life. "I kept thinking about that day," he continued, his gaze dropping to the concrete floor. "The showcase. What you said about the truth being the only thing that gives the work value. He looked up again, his eyes glistening. You were right. I sold stories, but I forgot what the truth was. I forgot where it all came from. He gestured vaguely around the workshop. From this? From you? He took a hesitant step forward. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I wanted you to know that I finally understand. I looked at the man before me, my son broken and humbled. The fire of justice in me had long since cooled, leaving only the deep, complicated embers of a father's love. I picked up a clean shop rag from the workbench. There's still a lot of work to do on this engine, I said, holding the rag out to him. An engine doesn't care about your past mistakes. It just cares about what you do next. If you want to learn, really learn this time, you know where to find me. He stared at the rag, then at me, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He gave a slow, shaky nod, turned, and walked back to his car without another word. I didn't know if he would be back tomorrow or the day after or ever, but for the first time in years, the door between us was open. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was an open road. And that was enough. My signature, I realized, was never meant for a piece of paper. It was the mark of integrity, of truth, of a legacy, passed not through a bill of sale, but from one hand to the next. It was the weight of a wrench, heavy with the promise of a second chance. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.